My name is Eduardo. I'm a Vue.js core team member, a freelance, and the author of Vue Router, Pinia, and Viewfire. And today I want to talk to you about elevating data fetching in Vue with data loaders. Now, data loaders is an RFC I wrote about 2 years ago, and it's extremely long. As you can see by the scroll bar on the side, this page is really long. The reason is because this is a technical document, it's a request for comment. So it contains a lot of details about the reasoning behind the motivation, the API choices, and some alternatives that are taken into consideration but haven't been implemented. Now, the reason I came up with these API is, of course, summarizing the RFC, but is way, way longer than what I could show in a talk. So my goal today is to show you how to use these API, what main problems, what are the main most common problems it is solving, and I'm going to show you how to migrate a page that is using regular data fetching in Vue to use this API and show you how much better it is. Now, the reason I created this data loader is because data fetching is really hard. It's a topic that is hard no matter the framework you're working on. And I think in Vue, we have a bit too many ways of doing data fetching. So for example, we can do client-only data fetching. So let's start with this component with a data that starts empty, right? And then we want to say, okay, so on mounted, so only on the client, we fetch some data and we put that into the reactive variable. And then we decide that, okay, but we also need to use the route. So what we do is we take into account the route params, and so we use a watcher instead, and we use immediate true, so it triggers immediately. This is now going to trigger also if we do server-side rendering, but this component doesn't work for server-side rendering for many other reasons. But at least now, if we change the route, it's gonna refetch and it's gonna refresh what is being visible. The navigation doesn't wait for it to appear, but it works. Okay, it's not bad. And then we decide that we want to display some loading state because otherwise we're just changing the URL and then we're displaying the old data, and then at some point the switch happens and we see the change. But we want to see that something is being done in the back, right? It makes us feel safer as a user. So we're gonna add some isLoading state that we set to true and false. And then we also want to handle errors. So maybe there are errors in our API calls and we want to display that there was an error rather than just go to loading and then to not loading, but not knowing why data didn't change. So all of these, as you can see, becomes really verbose, and data fetching is one of the most, if not the most common pattern that we use in applications. So it's very cumbersome to write this for every page that needs some data fetching. So that's why we have some composables that you could write. So you could use something already written by somebody else, like Unstack Query, which has a nice composable called useQuery that allows you to have some async state and its loading state, data state, everything into 4 lines. As you can see here, we just have 4 lines and it's right there, right? What we wrote in 50 lines, we have now 4 lines. So this is much more maintainable, and we get even more because we also have cache and other features. Now, other people might be using another approach, which is suspense. Now, suspense is, I think, by far the most elegant in terms of the way we write the code. We just put a weight in there and we await the data and we put that into the data. And so we could, even if we wanted, not even use a reactive property here if it doesn't change if it doesn't ever change, but most of the time it does change. Now, the issue with suspense is that it's too simple in a way. So it doesn't cover for issues that are present in even small applications, but you will have for sure 100% in medium to bigger applications. So we don't have any local loading state. We can display some loading state outside of the component, but not within the component. And this is problematic. The same happens for the error. There is no local error handling, so we cannot display the error here. We cannot know if we are in an error state. It happens outside of the component. So it's as if the suspense is a boundary for that data, and if we don't find, we are not able to fetch data, then that whole component is replaced. And that's where we display the error, which is not always convenient, especially when we have data that we are refreshing with new parameters like the route. Then we have cascading loading states. Now, this is inherent to how suspense works. It means that if we have nested components, like the nested component that also fetches, I wrote that right there. If these component fetches, we still need to wait for fetch some data to finish, and then we render the component, and then nested component that also fetches will fetch its data. We don't have parallel fetching there, so it can become very slow. And these kind of patterns can be very common in larger applications, and we don't really want to. We don't want to. And we cannot tell from these plays that the fetching should be parallel, and we shouldn't care either. So that one is a big issue in my opinion. Then we have no preloading, and so we cannot preload these fetch some data unless we do some build step pre-optimization. We don't have updates if parameter changes, so unless we use a key on the router view and we trigger a full remount of the component, but that's a bit wasteful in many occasions. And the main problem, and these two problems, is that everything depends on rendering the component, because the fetching is inside the script setup. We need to mount the component in order to fetch, and this can be very wasteful. So data loaders, they come to close the gap, all right, to bring all the benefits of using composables, but also integrate into the routing, and so not having these partial updates that we can see with anything like suspense and time-stack query, etc. So it can block the navigation or not if we don't want to, which means that the navigation won't happen until the data is ready, until everything has been fetched. It can change or abort the navigation if you have not found an error that was unexpected. You can abort the navigation. It deduplicates request and data access, meaning that even though we're going to define data loaders, we don't have to use them in the page components. We can use them anywhere, and they will still only fetch once. And this is really nice. By default, everything is parallel. So if two fetches do not depend on each other, usually it means that you don't need to cross-use them or use one inside of the other. There's no nesting user. So it should be parallel by default. Usually it's parallel. And if you want to have some sequential fetching, we can use one of the loaders inside a loader and it will work. And last but not least, we delay all the data updates until all the data loaders resolve. So that means that while things are refetching, the old data will still be displayed on the page until everything has completed. So in complex applications where you have a lot of different parts that are responsible for their own small fetching, you will not have an incoherent state in your application. So that's really nice. And this is something that you cannot solve with suspense or time-stack query or any your custom solution, unless you really implement something similar. So in a glimpse, what is a data loader? A data loader looks like this. We have this define loader function, and then we pass to it something. And the first thing you will notice is that we are inside of another script tag. Okay, we are not inside of the script setup. Now, I know this might sound a little bit annoying, but it is necessary because we are not while rendering the component. We are exporting something, and this is very useful. So inside of that define loader, depending on the implementation, we're going to see that we have multiple possible implementations. We can, and we will fetch some data and return something. Sometimes we might have an object for configuration. It depends on the data loader that you're using. And then what we get is a composable. And so this composable can be used anywhere. And this is really powerful. And we get access to the data, loading state, error, and a function to even manually reload the data, so redo the fetch. Okay, so now it's time for some demo. Let me show you how to migrate something that is a code that is using just a watcher to loaders. So I'm going to start by launching the demo. All right. So here, what I have is a page where I'm displaying and fetching from the Art Institute of Chicago API some artwork, and I'm displaying here. I have some pagination that is going to change the page on the URL, and it should trigger a new fetch. But as you can see, it takes some time because the API I purposely made it a little bit slow, so it takes some time. So it's a little bit frustrating when you are navigating through the pages and it just takes a lot of time to go there, but you have no feedback or whatsoever. Let me show you the code. In the code, we have this artwork list that we're using in the page, and then we are watching the current page, which is, I'm using use route query, which is my custom composable, and I'm taking the page from the route. And so I'm just fetching using this function. So in order to use the data loaders, we need to install the unplugin Vue Router. I already did it here, so we won't be able to, I won't be installing it again, but it's in the package somewhere here. It's in the package.json, and we have to configure our vconfig by importing it and using it before Vue. And so by default, it will pick up every page, so every Vue component inside of the folder pages. And we need to customize all the things on the main. For example, I'm adding the data loader plugin, which is coming from here. I'm customizing the way the router is created. So I'm using auto. As you can see, I'm not providing the routes. Now, there is something important to note here is that the file-based routing and the data loaders are two separate features. They do not require each other. The reason I'm using both is to have the type safety for the routes, which is very nice, and I'm going to show you in a moment. All right, and then we also need to install some other plugins. So for example, here I'm using Pinia, which I show later, and so I need to use all the plugins. All right, so let's start by migrating these to a basic data loader. I'm going to start by using another script. This one is not going to be set up. It has to be TS, and I'm going to use the define by basic data loader. So define basic loader, as you can see here. And so the first argument that we're going to pass is the name of the route we are. So as you can see here, I have the completion, and this is going to coerce the params of the route. Here it doesn't change anything, but I'm still going to pass it. And next, what we need to pass is a function that is going to fetch the information. So I'm going to use async. I'm going to pass a function that receives the argument. What the hell happened here? And then inside of that function, I'm going to fetch it. So I'm going to call the get artwork list, return get artwork list, and I'm going to pass, for the moment, just the first page, okay, just for the example. Now, this is going to give me a composable, so I'm going to call that use artwork list. And the last step is to export. So I need to export this in order to tell the router, hey, this page is using this loader. You should load it before navigating to the page. And now I can change everything I have here. So I can delete everything here and say const equals use artwork list. And inside I'm going to have the data, and I'm going to call that artwork list. I'm checking on the side if I don't have any errors. And now if I go back to the page and I reload, I should see always the first page. So even if I go to any page, I'll still see the first page. Let's go to the next. So if I want to use the next page, what I need to do is to pass the page from the query. So here I want to use to.query page, but I also need to parse it because this is going to be a string or an array. It comes from the user, so we cannot parse it. So what I have is a function that I already wrote, which is parse query, parse page query. And we're going to pass here the query, and I'm going to say or1, I think. Or maybe actually it already has a fallback probably. Yeah. And so as you can see here, I still have the current page here because I use it to change the URL. But now here they are changes, and when I navigate, I was already on the page too. Probably need a reload here. Let's see. And as you can see, when I navigate from one page to another, I have that loading bar on top. And once the loading is finished, we can see the data appear because we are waiting for the data to be ready. And so that's all it takes. Now let's do one a little bit more complicated. In the search, what you can see is that we don't have something that is fully working. We can hit a search, but it doesn't do anything. We have pagination, but it doesn't do anything. And more importantly, where are the images, right? So we're loading some placeholders and we're not loading the full resolution images. The idea is that I'm simulating a use case where I don't have all the information available in one API endpoint and I need to hit two API endpoints, one after the other. So I have some sequential loading. Let me show you the code. So I have some current page and search query, pretty much like before. And here I have the search results, and I'm searching for artwork using the query. And then when I submit the search, I change that value. And well, since it's not being watched, it doesn't re-trigger the search artwork. Now let's migrate these to a basic loader. So this time, to save a little bit of time, I'm going to the heck? I'm going to paste it here, and I'm going to explain everything in order. So I need to import the loader, and I need to import all the other things. So didn't work. Now that I have that, I can remove the unmounted, and the search result, oops, is going to become use our search results. Now I named it 2, but that was because I want to show you another one after this one. So what do? We do the same as before. We have the name of the route, we have the function, and here I'm ensuring that the query and the page are properly formatted so that this one is a string and this one is a number. And if query is not passed, then we can stop the navigation and say, hey, we don't want to navigate because we don't have any search, so we don't need to go there. Now, this navigation result, so we can either throw it or return it. And it will tell to the router that this loader is deciding to stop the navigation. We can pass anything that we can return in a navigation guard. So here, if I want to say, for example, query, so I could say query Goya, and then I should also paste the page, but it doesn't matter. If I try to go to an invalid query, it would just let's redo that whole section for a look. And here what I'm doing is checking if query is valid. And if it's not, I'm returning or throwing a navigation result. And this is going to tell the router to cancel the navigation, or rather to change the result of this navigation. Pretty much the same as returning a value in a navigation guard, but here we're using this class in order to let the router know if we are actually returning data or something else. And so we can pass anything that we can return in a navigation guard. And then in the end, I'm returning the promise of the actual search. So now if I go back, I have some pagination here. I should be able to search. Let me reload the page again. There we go. And we can search. We don't have all of that though. So what I'm missing is the full resolution images. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another loader that is going to use this loader here. So I'm going to show you this version. So I have another function that allows me to get all the images from the API. And the interesting part is this first line here, okay? Here I'm just formatting the data so I can fetch the images. What I'm doing here is I'm using the composable that I defined right above. And it's the same composable I'm using below in my script setup. But as you can see, I'm awaiting it. And the result is very different. Rather than getting an object with data, loading, error, etc., I just have the raw data. And so these data can be different from the one we have in the page because this is still happening through during the navigation, which might not be complete. So in order to keep things consistent, this data might be a new version of the page we're trying to navigate that to. But if the navigation is canceled, then this data is never going to get committed, so it will never appear in the actual page. And this await usage is only valid within the loaders, and this is what we have. This is what we need to write to sequential loading. Then I'm just getting the images, I'm setting that into a map, and I'm returning that map. So what I need to do here is to get that map. And it should be something like this. I think I named it images, maybe not. Oh, I actually need to uncomment these, which is the full resolution image. And now I get the actual full resolution images. And if I navigate to a new page, you see, well, I think I need to reload the page again. Lost something on the HTML there. So when I go to a new page, it takes a little bit longer, you see, because if you take a look at the network panel, so it's very small here, right? My plan is not to show you the actual data, but more about how many lines we have. But it's gonna fetch first the search and then the pages. And as we go to another page, it's gonna search for the page too, and then the images. And only once the images are there, we navigate to the new page. And so that's why they appear right away. But sometimes the information is not essential to display the page. We could just display the page with the low resolution images and confirm the navigation there. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna mark this second data loader as lazy. So when we do, what is happening? When we do lazy true, the data loader is not awaited. And so when we navigate to the page, you see how it takes more time to display the images because the navigation is confirmed as soon as we have the data, and the artwork fetching is triggered immediately, even during the navigation, but the results are not awaited. So we still get there only once. So we still get to see the results later on. Now, we can also have other options like server, false, if we don't want to trigger at all a call on the server. Now here I'm not using any server-side rendering, but it could be useful, right? And so this is nice in terms of API, it's really nice, but it's still a little bit inconvenient when it comes to, well, navigating through pages. For example, here I'm navigating through a few pages. It's a bit slow, but when I go back, I still need to wait for the API to be called, even though there is a cache for sure because it's a little bit faster, but it would be nice if I could just not call the API at all because the API is still fresh, the fetch data is still fresh. So this is where we use something like Tanstack query. And in this case, I'm going to use something else. I'm going to use Pinia, which is data fetching layer for Pinia. It's very tiny and it works very well with data loaders. So let me show you how to migrate the index here to use the data loader. I'm going to use the data loader, which comes from a plugin again, but another path. And instead of having a function, it has an object. Now, I don't know why the editor is doing that, but okay. And so this is going to be a query, and I also need a key. And so key is going to allow me to define, oh, come on. Okay. Key is going to allow me to define how is this saved, the key is going to tell Pinia Colada how to save this in the cache. So in this case, we need to use a function, and that function is going to retrieve the route we're going to. And the idea is we need to use everything that is used to make the request. So here I'm going to type that as artworks, and then I'm going to pass the page. Now here I cannot use an array, so I do need to parse that, and I can use parse page query, just like that. And so by doing this, I'm creating cache entries for every single page. So every single page has its own cache entry, which means that when I reload again, as we navigate through the pages, I'm creating a cache entry. So if I go back, it's really fast. And the data is going to stay fresh for 5 seconds by default. We can customize that. But as you can see, if I try to do it again, because the 5 seconds already elapsed, the data is not fresh anymore. It's considered stale. So Pinia Colada is going to be smart enough to say, okay, we need to actually fetch and wait for a new fetch. As you can see here, fast for 5 seconds, and then it takes time to load. So that's pretty cool, but we can also do something really interesting. We can use it in the search, but in the search, we can also only use it for one of them. So for example, I can say data loader here. I'm gonna do the query here. I'm gonna do the key, and I'm gonna use that later on. Just one to format everything. And so here, same. I need to say artworks, and I need to pass the query, and it's not exactly right. I need to pass the page. So page, I need to parse the query search, parse page query, and also, why does it do that? Query, parse, search, query. There you go. So I should also use probably search here, since it's a little bit different from the other API endpoint. It's not hitting the same endpoint. And so by doing this, well, it took me literally 30 seconds to change. Now I do some search. I'm gonna reload the page just in case. I'm gonna pass it here again, and I'm gonna navigate through the pages a little bit. But as you can see, the navigations are faster for some time. Once the cache is busted, then it becomes slow again. So for example, here we can pass other options that are proper to Pinia Colada. For example, the GC time, the initial data, stale time, etc., 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 etc. Some are specific to loaders like commit, lazy, and server. And so this is the interesting part, is that these loaders, so data loaders are not just an implementation, like it's also a spec for libraries to follow, so they can provide a way to integrate closely to the navigation of Vue Router and provide the best experience with composables, but still stick to the navigation and have something that is highly configurable with coherent state across the application. So today I'm showing Collada Loader because this is the one I'm working on and is the most powerful one existing yet. But ideally, this could be used by other libraries as well. All right, so that was everything I wanted to show to you today. If you're interested in learning more, check the GitHub repository for unplugging Vue Router and its documentation. Check the Pinia Colada repository as well. And you can check the slides in this URL, which I'm not going to say because it's a bit long. And you can also find the code for the demo I show you on this repository. And as a last note, I want to say if you are looking forward to implementing this in your application, I have some sponsoring program that enables me to work with companies in order to help them. And one of the points is to keep improving on the data loaders API. That's everything I had to talk about today. I hope you liked it, and thanks for your time.
I thought it was great. So I'm pretty sure everybody else liked it too. All right. Few questions for you. Let's see. Are there use cases where you wouldn't want to use data loaders and just use a fetch API instead? Eduardo?
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sorry, I had muted the tab for a moment there. I went to check
Oh,
something
I
on the
totally
side.
get it. I do that too. And plus, like half the time I mute myself. So I was like, wait, did I break it again? So first question of, are there use cases where you wouldn't want to use data loaders or just use a fetch API instead?
So by fetch API, that could be many things. I would assume that means just a fetch call. I just use the native fetch call. There are cases, yes, if you only want to load the data once and there is no arguments, there is no need for cache. So you have a very simple case, you can just use the fetch API. The data loaders, by the way, are not limited to data fetching. It works with any asynchronous state. So most of the time, I think that if you don't want to add anything, if you want to be the smallest possible, you probably don't use the router either. You just have a page with Vue and nothing else. And in that case, you don't have the data loaders anyway. But as soon as you have routing and you add some data fetching, the data loaders are probably going to add value, a lot of value, I mean. So I don't think that as soon as you use that, I would use the data loaders instead of just the fetch API.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Up next, someone is using Pinia Store as a repository to fetch all APIs through it. Is that a good idea? And does it impact performance of their application?
Per se, it's not a bad or good idea. It's just a way of doing things. It shouldn't have an impact in performance. I mean, a negative impact in performance. I think a lot of people use sometimes Pinia stores as cache of data. And I think that in those scenarios, using Tanstack query or the Pinia Colada plugin makes more sense. But it really depends on what they are writing, right? So you can fetch the data through stores. It's a good way to make them global. It's not necessary, right? That's what I want to say, is that it's not needed. It just allows for some optimizations, but it also creates other risks of having desynchronization, things that are solved with data loaders for API, for example. Yeah, and it shouldn't have a negative impact in performance.
Very cool. Thank you. How do data loaders compare to the data fetching capabilities of Nuxt?
So the data fetching capabilities in Nuxt, right now, they use suspense. So in a way, they are limited by suspense. But if I recall correctly, Sebastian told me that Daniel was working on some way of having parallel requests, which to me is the biggest, biggest blocker or the biggest inconvenience of suspense for data fetching. So they are, as long as data fetching in Next uses suspense, it would just fall in that category. So it means that it has the limitations of suspense. Or if it doesn't have the limitations, there are alternative ways of doing things. For example, double mounting, which means that you have a performance impact. And so depending on your pages, you have to mount twice. You don't have to, so mount is maybe not the right word, but you have to, at least the virtual DOM has to mount twice. So it doesn't work in all scenarios. And as long as they stay on the suspense track, they will have some of these limitations. So I would say the data loaders in general, in terms of at least the promise, because right now it's still experimental, they are just more powerful.
I feel like we could also put this on Daniel Rowe, but ask him the same question too.
Yeah, he probably has more up-to-date vision of the data fetching capabilities of Next.
All right. And last question for you. Is it necessary to use TypeScript to add data loader to Vue in Vue?
No.
Oh, that was an easy ending. Like, no, it's good. No, it's not necessary.
Yeah,
I like it. I like it.
It just works too.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Eduardo, so much for your time today. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Sorry for the small delay in the beginning.
No worries. Thank you so much.